on a new series of messages, and you know what happens with this pastor when I get into a new series. We know that there's a beginning, but no one but God knows when the end's going to be with the series. You see, we start something. I even have the t-shirt. I started to preach and I can't stop, Pastor Gill Belec. It's at the house. So, yeah, they'll just turn the mic off. Keep on keeping on. But here's the thing. I want to talk to you tonight, beginning this series. The title of this series is called The Privilege of Prayer. If you want to write notes down, now is the time to start. The Privilege of Prayer. How many know that wonderful hymn of the church, What a Friend We Have in Jesus? In fact, we're singing it as our hymn this Sunday morning. And what is the first verse of What a Friend We Have in Jesus? All our sins
and griefs to bear.
And griefs to bear. What a
privilege to
carry everything
to God in prayer.
You've all been good students of singing. God bless you. You've been studying on that. If you enjoyed that song, would anybody be interested tonight in knowing how the song came about?
Yeah. Sure.
Can I read you the story?
Yes.
Sorry, but although he was born in Ireland, he lived in Canada, so don't get too I know that was going to mess things up, but you know, hey, listen, they asked, can any good thing come out of Nazareth, you know? And can anything good come out of Canada? Well, if it's good, it'll come out, and I'm here. So anyways. So listen closely, great. Joseph Scriven watched in shock as the body of his fiancée was pulled from the lake. Their wedding had been planned for the next day. Reeling from the tragedy, he made up his mind to immigrate to America. Packing his belongings in Dublin, Ireland, he sailed for Canada, leaving his mother behind, and he was about 25 years old. 10 years later, in 1855, he received word that his mother was facing a crisis. This Joseph Scriven here wrote this poem, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and sent it to her. Mrs. Scriven evidently gave a copy to a friend who had published it anonymously. And it quickly became a popular hymn, though no one knew who had written it. 10 years later, in 1855, now let's go back. Meanwhile, Joseph fell in love again. He fell in love again. But tragedy struck a second time when his bride, Elisa Catherine Rush, contracted tuberculosis and died in 1860 before their wedding could take place. To escape his sorrow, Joseph poured himself into ministry, doing charity work for the Plymouth Brethren and preaching among the Baptists. He lived a simple, obscure life in Port Hope, Ontario, Canada, cutting firewood for widows, giving away his clothes and money to those in need. He was described as a man of short stature. Must have been French-Canadian or something. With iron gray hair, close-cropped beard, and light blue eyes that sparkled when he talked.
You wrote this, didn't you?
Ira Sankey, who's a great songwriter back in those days, later wrote, until a short time before his death, it was not known that he had a poetic gift. A neighbor sitting up with him in his illness happened upon a manuscript of What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Reading it with a great delight and questioning Mr. Scriven about it, he said that he had composed it for his mother, to comfort her at a time of special sorrow, not intending that anyone should see it. Sometime later, When another Port Hope neighbor asked him if it was true that he composed a hymn, his reply was, "The Lord and I did it between us." In October 10th of 1896, Joseph became critically ill in his delirium. He rose from his bed and staggered outdoors, where he fell into a small creek and drowned at the age of 66. His grave was arranged so that his feet were opposite those of his lost wife, Lisa Catherine Rush, that at the resurrection they might be facing each other. Quite a poetic poem. What a friend we have in Jesus. I must tell you that probably the greatest songs that were ever written out of tragedies.
Right.
That's right.
You read David's songs in the scriptures. The greatest divine and godly and heavenly insights that he got was when he was being pursued by Saul and his army.
Yeah.
When he was facing the lions. When he was challenged as a king. The greatest songs that were written out of tragedies. David taught us how to pray. When he called out on the Lord during his days of trying. We have become very well-trained escape artists in many ways.
Yeah.
Rather than facing our problem with faith and with stable trust in God, we look to dodge them, to escape them. We play the Houdini act. Get out of this trap. What we don't realize is that each trial, each tribulation, each temptation is a test. If we try to avoid the test, you won't have a testimony.
Right.
Amen.
But rather, if you will face your Goliath, your impossibility, shall we call it, in life, you'll be able to stand with David and sing the praises of God, that through the hardships, rather than evading them, running from them, being an escape artist, facing them and conquering them, whether it's our fears, our challenges in life, whatever they might be that stands between you and victory, if we conquer them, think of the great sense of fulfillment, gratification, and a sense of victory that you have. How many appreciate the hymns that we sing week upon week?
Amen.
If you were to read, I have studied the majority of those hymns, and trust me when I tell you, 98% of them were written from a tragedy, some hardship. Fanny Crosby, when she was a little girl at the age of 6, 7, and 8, somewhere in that area, way back in the mid-1800s, developed an eye problem. Her mother brought little Fanny Crosby to the doctors. And the doctor, in the South they call it, bless his heart, thought he was doing the right thing by her. He poured some type of an acid in her eyes and instantly, permanently blinded the little 7 or 8 year old. Well, songs like Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine, this is my story, was birthed from a little girl who was blinded. You look at the second verse, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. A blind woman saying visions. If she hadn't been blind, would we have gotten that hymn?
No.
I don't think so. Now, and mind you, it was in New York City that most of her hymns and songs were written. during the days of D.L. Moody and other ones that would preach in New York and sometimes in Chicago. She was sought out from all over the world. And people would give her 2-3 sentences of a poem, and she'd come back in 20 minutes with the whole hymn. She was gifted. But had she not gone through the tragedy, would that have bursted forth and blossomed? I rather doubt it. The Apostle Paul had a thorn in his flesh, a physical debilitation, a physical problem. He sought the Lord thrice, he said. 3 times he sought the Lord about this problem that he had. No one's certain. Most theologians feel like it was about his eyes. The vast majority of his epistles were written by Luke and other ones traveling with him. There's a reason why they had to write for him. He wrote, I think it was to the Galatians or some group of people that said, I know that if you could have, you'd have given me your eyes to help me. So there's an indication there was an eye problem. Some may accuse him and say, Paul, don't you have enough faith? What's the matter? That the faith movement today would have condemned Paul for not having enough faith. But thanks to the problem that he had, we've discovered the sufficiency of the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ in our impossible moments in life. When you're ready to lose your mind and have a psychosis, a breakdown.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks to his stressful experiences of life, the Lord was able to say, I heard your prayer, Paul. I heard you the first time. This is the 3rd time you asked me. And he audibly heard the voice of Christ tell him, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you.
Thank you. Amen.
Quit looking for an escape. Let me use you despite this problem, in the midst of this difficulty. I will be glorified through that infirmity. Does that negate God's ability to heal and his desire to heal? No, it does not. We trust the Lord in all matters.
Amen.
But I wanted to share these thoughts with you concerning this problem that occasioned this scribe, Joseph Scriven, to write this poem. He did out of compassion for his mother, but it turned out through his mother's problem, his heart, and all that he's been through in life. We have that hymn. Can you try to imagine since 1855? How many years is that? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 165 years. 160 years. How many countless millions of people that man's gift of what a friend we have in Jesus has touched. Had not been through those situations and asked God to remove them, we wouldn't have what a friend we have in Jesus. If John Newton would not have been the man that he was and gone through what he went through, we wouldn't have Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. David himself said, it was good for me that your hand was heavy on me. It forced me to seek you and to worship you. This afternoon, out of nowhere, again, how often do I bring the same story to you? Another lady walking off the street into the office. Lovely lady. She said, it's not the first time I have come here. On my lunch period, I come out in my car and I go sit in a parking lot. And I rest and I pray after I eat my little lunch. Sometimes I get out, she said, and I walk around, and that's how I discovered you, this office. I've been here a couple of times before, but when I put my head to sneak in, you were already at the altar praying, deep in prayer. I didn't want to disturb you. but I didn't see you at the altar today at my office. So I thought I'd knock on the door and ask you to pray for me. She needed counseling. After counseling with her, I asked if I could pray for her. So I grabbed her left hand and we prayed together. When I was through praying, her face was completely saturated with tears. She felt the glory of God, lifting burdens, giving peace. Prayer is not just an essential in life. Today I met with 4 other pastors. We went to three or four of the pastors today to pray out here in West Columbia. And they asked me, it's my first time with these gentlemen, and they asked if I would have a word to share with them. And I told them tonight what I'm talking about is the privilege of prayer. And that was a prayer meeting that we went to this morning. And I shared with them what I felt the Lord had laid upon my heart. And I'm not sure if in public or not I should say this, so I won't. But something happened this morning at the end of that service that never happened to me before. One of the pastors fell to his knees at my feet and did something that I have never had happen to me. I've never experienced in my life. I believe that as I was sitting over here after well, you notice that before service while we were singing Just As I Am, I Surrender all the prelude music that we were doing, did you sense the wonderful presence of God? I don't know.
Amen. Yes.
If you don't feel it down there, you might want to come to the piano bench and sing just try to feel what I feel when people are playing the piano. But when I came down here and Pastor Stephen was leading worship, I felt a healing wave. I felt a wave of glory that was descending upon this congregation. And I feel that this, as I mentioned to you 3 or 4 weeks ago as we entered into 2019, that I sense that we're on the precipice of a tremendous wave of God's glory here at Calvary Church. I don't know what it's all about. But I've got to get into my message, y'all. You do this to me every time, you know that.
This is a message.
This is a message, isn't it? Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4. Verse 6 and 7.
7.
Philippians chapter 4. Verse 6 and 7. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 or 7. You remember last week I shared this? Where did Jefferson go? I thought I saw him. It says, be anxious for nothing. The word anxious, we get anxiety, stress from. Be anxious for nothing. How many feel that that could be a tall order when you're facing dramatic and traumatic experiences in life? I mean, that can be a challenge.
Yes.
Yes.
But would the Apostle Paul give us the apostolic directive, be anxious for nothing, if it couldn't be?
Amen.
Would he tell us to do that? If it couldn't be? He gives us the instruction because there is a dimension called anxious free. Get that? There is a sphere. If I say sphere.
Sphere.
Yeah. Of anxiety-free experience and walk in life. It exists. I cannot imagine for the life of me Jesus being shocked. Oh no, I didn't know. How did that happen? What are we going to do now? I can't imagine Jesus responding in that.
No.
As a matter of fact, Jesus challenged his disciples. 5,000 people needed to be fed. He'd been preaching all day. People were hungry. The disciples said, you better send them home, son. They have a long way to walk and they got supper to cook. Give them time. He said, I want you to feed them. I mean, that could be stressful.
Yes.
Now, we're not talking about a church picnic at Calvary Community Church at the Paw or the Red Bud, shelter over at Saluda. Shows here. We're talking about feeding 5,000 people. He said, and we don't have the money to go to the village. I don't think there'd be enough bakery shops, bread shops, or fish shops anywhere in the village area to provide for 5,000 people. So the Lord said, you feed them. How many sense that there'd be a little stress coming on, right? Well, how in the world are we going to do that? Well, go into the crowd and see what you can find. See, how many know that God always has the solution?
Yes.
Amen.
Anxiety won't acquire it for you.
Right.
Is that correct? Anxiety will not acquire for you. It will not garner you the solution. Listen, God can't get through anxiety to you. Anxiety and fear stops. You getting that? God can't get through that. God cannot penetrate fear and unbelief and doubt. He can't get through. He can't. It's a barrier. And by the way, if He was to bless you while you're in an anxious state, you would think that being anxious would be the answer and solution for every problem you have. So God refuses deliberately because He doesn't want you to think that He'll grant you your prayer or your petition in the state of anxiety. He doesn't want to do that because that is not the path of God.
Right.
The path of God is the Father knows what you have need of before you ask Him. That's the path of God. Jesus said, don't worry about what you eat, what you wear, where you live. The heathens and the pagans look for these things, but you seek first the kingdom of God. You see, God has the answer, the solution. He has the method. He may not show it to you in a dream, a vision during the night. You may not have a big flash, and all of a sudden you see a panoramic view of all the answers. It may come through a pastor. It may come through an elder. It may come through a deacon. It may come from a lowly, no-count member of your church. But God, if you'll have an ear to listen what the Spirit says, He'll tell you. And if you can identify the message, if you can identify the instruction, you follow the instruction and you'll get out of your problem.
Amen.
God refuses to bless in the midst of anxiety. He can't, because it sends the wrong signal.
Right.
It's like saying to your kids when they have a conniption, the little 3-year-old and 2-year-old fits. And if the parent gives in, then that child has control of the parent.
And how many of them?
Yep. And so the parents give in just to quietly appease them. Now you have taught them how to get out of you whatever they want.
Amen.
God does not raise those kind of kids.
That's right.
Not in His body.
Right.
So He won't respond to anxiety.
Right. Amen.
Oh God, please God, you gotta get me out of this, God, please, I'm on God. Shut up. The disciples I talked about, the holes in the boat last week? Yeah. Don't you care? He's going to perish. What? Perish? How do you know the word perish is not in Jesus' vocabulary?
Amen.
It's not in God's dictionary. He has no concept. Somebody help me. Perishing has no concept in God's mind. He's an eternal God. That's His nature. So Paul says, be anxious for nothing. I got to get out of this verse. Y'all help me. Be anxious for nothing. But in everything, everybody say everything?
Everything.
By prayer and supplication and thanksgiving. Now I want you to notice something here. I like to give, Natalie, I like to give God's psychology and God's psychiatry. Ology is the study of, iatry is the healing of. From God. When I look at a verse, I don't just read a verse. I look at it, I don't even examine it, but it just pops out at me. So, to negate and to neutralize anxiety, you have to have a couple of things going for you. You have to, first of all, you have to go to prayer. But there's a stipulation that will negate and will dismiss the anxiety. It's a thing called thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is the antidote. Did you get that? It's right in that verse.
Yeah.
How many believe that God's the best psychologist,
Amen.
Amen.
the best psychiatrist, so be it from them, but in everything, through prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving. See, again, thanksgiving, as I mentioned to you the last couple of weeks on Sunday mornings, enter his gates with thanksgiving, and his courts with praise. It's important because thanksgiving conditions your receptors. Somebody help me in that. That's pretty good, Gary, if I say so myself. Very good. Thanksgiving conditions your receptors to receive instruction, to receive the peace that passes understanding. Be grateful, man. Be grateful. Oh, Pastor, if you never had a problem, you wouldn't be. Oh, shut up, even. Are your problems bigger than God? Is God bigger than your problem? Then shut up. Just back off. Don't behave as though your problems are bigger than God.
Right.
As though your problems confuse God and got him in a pinch. Even God doesn't know what to do with my problem. I know that's not true.
That's right.
Don't do that. I don't mean to be blunt when I say shut up. But I talk to my kids that way. Talk to my grandkids. No, don't do that. You know, I call it the shock treatment. There are things that you can negotiate with children and grandchildren and people, adults and stuff. There are things you can talk about and negotiate. Other things that you just absolutely slap upside the thought. Slap the thought out. No! That's not, it's not even negotiable. It's not even on the table for discussion. There are things that are non-negotiable. How many understand what I'm saying? There are convictions of the word that are non-negotiable.
Right.
We don't come to the table with God to negotiate, man.
That's right.
And try to persuade God to our thinking. Don't do that. Get it out of your mind. So, thanksgiving is the antidote. Thanksgiving is the solution. Thanksgiving is the perking up of your receptors to receive from God instruction. Why is it that you need to be thankful? Because, let me tell you, there are more things in your life, no matter what you're going through right now, there are more things that you can be thankful for than the things that you can be depressed about.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes. Absolutely.
Is that right, Georgia?
Yes.
How many feel that you have more things in your life to be grateful for than things that are going bad in your life?
Amen.
Somebody about to put their legs up along with their arms and say, yeah. So, why would there not be thankfulness? Because, see, it conditions your heart, your receptors. It conditions your antennas. It conditions your discernment. It conditions your faith. It conditions your capacity to receive. So he says, by prayer and supplication. Supplication is an intense, a really intense request. Pleading, with someone. With thanksgiving, let your request known to God. Watch what happens in verse 7. You thought I wasn't going to get there, I know. And the peace of God, everybody say peace of God,
Peace of God.
that passes all understanding, will do what? Read it.
Guard your heart.
Guard your heart and mind through Christ Jesus.
How many want your heart and your mind to be safeguarded by God?
Amen.
God just gave us the exact solution.
Yeah.
He just did that in this one verse, verse 6. You know, sir, Paul didn't go through what I went through again. Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You could not have gone through one day of what Paul went through
Amen.
Amen.
Lord, what I want.
and survive it. Not in today's economy, moral and spiritual economy, no possible way. If you want to read something about that, you read 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and also chapter 4 and 5. Unbelievable what the man's been through. So much that he thought the sentence of death was upon him. Now, let me go back to something. If you want to go ahead and turn that off for now, I'm going to bring you something.